Hello and welcome. My name is Godfrey Mutizwa and welcome to BanKable Insights. Now, when the history of the coronavirus is written, the importance of sustainability in business planning will surely pop up among the many lessons drawn from the biggest health crisis of our lifetime. And that's the focus of our first discussion on BanKable Insights 2021. We're asking the questions: what are the key sustainability trends as we enter a second year living under COVID-19? We're also asking, how do we help in the reallocation of capital in ESG-related investing, and how do we bring in banks and other businesses inside the conversation on the United Nations Social Development Goals? To help me answer all of those questions is Kweku Bedu-Addo. He is the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank South Africa and Southern Africa. Kweku, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Godfrey. Sustainability is a very broad area, but clearly the world has come to accept it as an inevitability in terms of building a sustainable world. And financial services have an important role to play in delivering sustainability on a global scale. As a financial institution, we are committed to the UN SDGs, and we believe that the financial sector, including Standard Chartered Bank, can unlock major new investment and business opportunities to help mitigate sustainability-related risks through financing. A wide range of financial products exist, from equity solutions through to debt solutions. And depending on the nature of the financing need, the financial services sector is available to help society to evolve towards sustainable living and sustainable economies. So there's a lot in that space that we as a bank are committed to. We have already made bold commitments as far back as 2 years ago at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Our group CEO made a very bold statement that we want to be the world's best leading sustainable bank. And we are very committed to that.
Yeah. And is that a widely held industry view, Kweku, from your perspective?
I think it's moving from the fringes to the mainstream, Godfrey. I mean, there's no serious financial institution that does not have a sustainable or sustainability agenda at the moment. And I think that is commendable, because then the financial services industry can offer the necessary partnership with civil society, with governments, with investors to deliver a sustainable economy globally. And that's the only way we will see an improvement around the world.
So you say it is moving to the mainstream, recognizing that in some cases perhaps it's not where it should be. So I wanted us to delve a little deeper into it and ask the question around the types of sustainable initiatives that we are seeing that are being implemented before we talk about the work that you guys have done after the commitment of your CEO.
There are initiatives. I can speak for my institution, that is Standard Chartered Bank, where we launched Opportunity 2030 report in 2020. We identified a $10 trillion gap in financing for the SDG goals in 15 of our key emerging markets, and with particular emphasis on the goal SDGs 6, 7, and 8. SDG 6 deals with clean water and sanitation. SDG 7 deals with affordable and clean energy. And SDG 8 deals with industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Godfrey, you would agree with me that if these sectors attracted the needed investment, it could lift whole generations out of poverty and improve the lives of the next generation. And that's the kind of prosperity that we want to see. And we have set ourselves ambitious targets as a bank. We are committed to financing $75 billion of sustainable infrastructure, clean technology, and renewables for the 5-year period starting January 2020.
Right.
It is a commitment we've made and are working assiduously towards fulfilling that goal.
Is that money easy to find, Kweku, given one, the environment that's been created obviously by the coronavirus, and also secondly, the challenges that we know you do find in some of the markets that you operate in emerging markets when you try to deploy or try to raise that capital?
Is it easy to deploy the money or to arrange the financing? I think the capital markets is very active for raising funds. There are various vehicles through which these funds are raised. We have what we call the green bonds,
yes,
which finance projects and activities with environmental benefits, with a strong emphasis on shifts to low carbon emission or decarbonization of the environment, climate resilience, and resource efficiency. So green bonds is very much an active investment vehicle or funding vehicle on the capital markets at the moment. We also have blue bonds, which primarily focus on the oceans, as well as the sustainability of the biodiversity in the oceans. We also have blended finance, which is the structured way of combining private investors with public sector investors in such a manner that both sides meet their objectives. Public sector typically has social objectives.
Mm-hmm.
Private sector has it's profit-oriented with commercial returns, but it's blended in such a way that both sides come to the table and meet their objectives. So there are various ways of raising the capital to fund these projects, and that's what the world is moving towards. That's why I say that it's becoming mainstream. It's moving from the fringes gradually to become a mainstream activity, which is positive for the world.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that you have done so far within that space.
First of all, as a bank, we as I said, our group CEO has made a bold proclamation about our commitment to being our commitment to sustainable social and economic development through the business that we do, the markets that we operate in, and the communities that we engage. So it's very much part of our DNA increasingly. And we are promoting sustainable finance in our markets. We are committed to supporting sustainable economic growth, expanding renewable financing, and investing in sustainable infrastructure, which is what is needed most. What do I mean by sustainable infrastructure? Mm-hmm. That is infrastructure that is designed, built, and operated in such a manner that they do not conflict or undermine human equity, human dignity, diversity, and functioning of natural ecosystems. I think it's not far-fetched to scientists believe that the COVID crisis that we have at the moment is a result of disturbing the ecosystem and the balance within nature between man and other living organisms. So it's a way of moving gradually the world towards achieving balance through development. So that's one area that we've committed ourselves to as a bank. In terms of specific contributions, I've talked about the Opportunity 2030 report that we launched. Our commitment with balance sheet of 75 billion over a five-year period. We've committed ourselves to green projects that help to avoid almost 750,000 tons of carbon dioxide emission in the last year alone. We are supporting hydropower projects that deliver clean energy, as well as mass transportation projects that rely less or are efficient in the utilization of fuel, which again helps in reducing carbon emission.
Yeah.
With the other projects we're looking at in across Africa, in Asia, in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, India, Zambia, all of which are linked to the UN SDGs. For example, delivery of water to communities. We're working on a project in Zambia that will deliver water to 4 communities, and it's there. We have a lot of projects coming up. Hospitals is another area that we've looked at. We've helped finance the construction of provincial hospitals in Zambia again. That would provide 433 hospital beds,
Sure.
including ICU, to the community.
I wanted to talk a little bit about whether these requirements, these commitments that you're making, make your job harder, i.e., is it more difficult for you to find sustainable projects as it is to perhaps do it as you would normally do it in your everyday work?
I think, to the credit of Standard Chartered, long before sustainable financing became a buzzword in the global community, we were in that space. I remember personally being involved in funding ecological restoration of a dead water body many years ago, maybe about 20 years ago.
Sure.
It wasn't fashionable then to do such projects. In fact, if you went to a credit committee with a project proposal to fund ecological restoration of a dead water body, people would think, but what's the financial benefits?
Exactly.
On surface value, that's the question that would be asked. But we did that project. We did that project successfully. We had co-financing partners, development institutions that participated in financing. So in many ways, we were already in that space before it became fashionable. In terms of transition from mainstream financing to what sustainable financing entails, I think we're just building on the existing intermediation infrastructure, systems, and processes. It's not a far departure from what we already do as financial institutions or as banks. We're just building upon that to branch out into an area that society desperately needs across the globe.
Yeah.
To repair the damage to the ecology, to the climate, and to communities in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, which brings me to the question of what you said was sustainable finance. Does sustainable finance mean cheaper finance? What does it mean?
Not necessarily cheaper, although it could probably, depending on the sourcing. And as I alluded to earlier, there are so many vehicles. I talked about the blended financing. I talked about the green bonds. I talked about the blue bonds. It really depends on the structure of the transaction, the participation in the transaction, who's underwriting what risk. Government's own participation sometimes helps to underwrite part of the risks that cannot be diversified to private institutions. So it's a mix. I would say it's a mix of factors that would determine pricing ultimately.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean necessarily that it comes at concessional funding. We shouldn't confuse sustainable financing by commercial private institutions or lenders with concessional funding by development agencies or funding institutions such as the World Bank and the regional development banks.
Yeah.
But we can't participate in deals that they are involved in. There's been there's been a lot of co-financing that has gone on over the years. The blended financing sometimes helps to reduce the cost of the funding and the financing burden that the obligors ultimately will bear. So yes, depending on the structure, it could be cheaper than mainstream financing.
Yeah, I wanted you to answer as well, Kweku, to this other, I think some say it's a misconception now that when you talk sustainable development and when you talk sustainable investment, you are also talking the language of lower returns. In the space that you guys have operated in, is this something that you have seen, or perhaps this is just a misunderstood area of doing business and being responsible for the environment that you're operating in?
No, it doesn't mean lower returns. As I mentioned, I shared an example of funding that we did for ecological restoration of a dead water body.
Yes.
And to the best of my recollection, we did not do the transaction at a loss or at inferior economic returns to shareholders or
Right.
on the capital that we use. So no, I don't think that it implies low returns. We also have to appreciate that capital has a cost. And so it's structured in such a way that all sides benefit from the transaction. By all sides, I mean the borrower as well as the lending institutions. It has to be structured in such a way that it's sustainable on all fronts.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the key trends that we are seeing within this sector, within the sustainable investment environment as we enter into 2021. Some people are suggesting that what it has done, the coronavirus, is to wake us up and actually say, hello, while today is important, it's actually far more important that we also think about the future and prepare adequately.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some of the major trends we're seeing are carbon transition. Carbon transition will continue to feature. Maybe it's not very mainstream in Africa yet, but I think that it will be coming our way. But it's very much topical in other parts of the world because there's an urgent need to achieve a net carbon zero world by 2050. And there are strenuous efforts to reduce carbon emissions. The effort is intensifying and transition away from carbon intensive or projects that release a lot of carbon into the atmosphere and moving the other way towards projects that have less emission to zero emission. That is a very big focus of financial institutions, including ours. So that's one major trend we're seeing. Then is the evolution of carbon markets, which will help sectors reduce their emissions, but also perhaps quantify and monetize carbon efficiency in such a way that it incentivizes economic agents to reduce carbon emission by creating a market for carbon. I believe that there's a task force on scaling voluntary carbon that has been launched in September 2020 by the former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. And fortunately, this is chaired by our group chief executive, Bill Winters. And one of their main tasks is to create a single, uniform, transparent carbon market for a world to ease the pathway or create a pathway towards a carbon neutral world. Another trend that is emerging globally is the circular economy, which is to help the environment reduce waste. The concept of the circular economy is reducing, recycling, and reusing, introducing them as core concepts around the world, which means less products being produced and less burden on the environment and on infrastructure because of the inculcating the habit of the 3 R's, reducing, recycling, and reusing. That would obviously tamper down consumption and help to conserve resources for future generations as well. So that becomes a circular economy. Another way is biodiversity.
Yep.
Sensitivity to biodiversity is important. I believe that perhaps insensitivity to biodiversity has culminated in the global pandemic that we have at the moment. So it's useful to remind all of us that biodiversity matters, and human consumption of resources that impact negatively on biodiversity needs to be put in check and reversed, and people need to be educated about it. According to the WWF Living Planet report, the population of mammals, fish, reptiles, and birds and amphibians has fallen below an average of 68% since 1970s.
Sure.
And that is a damning report on all of us as humanity. And so the more we remain sensitive and aware of some of these emerging trends in terms of sustainable financing, the better. I've talked about the blue bonds. The blue bonds simply referring to funding of projects that improve the health of our oceans and the biodiversity.
Yeah.
So the flip side is the oceans and the blue economy, because you would recognize that water covers about 70% of the Earth's surface, and it is crucial to helping preserve that resource for future generations. And we can only do so if we balance production and with the need to reduce pollution of our water bodies, overfishing, which depletes the biodiversity within the water bodies. So again, there's a market forming. There's the Ocean Panel, which includes Australia, Canada, and Japan, committed to sustainably managing the oceans under their jurisdiction by 2025. And I think these are laudable initiatives that all nations must subscribe to help improve the biodiversity, restore the biodiversity in our oceans, as well as to protect the oceans. Last but not the least is the use of technology. The biggest gainers under this COVID environment have been owners of technology, innovators, and institutions that have invested in technology. They have been somehow been insulated from the pandemic and the anarchy that it has unleashed on many societies and many communities. So the use of technology is very important as a way of creating a sustainable planet, using less paper, less carbon emission. Increasingly, we are hearing of electrical cars. It's becoming more and more prominent. I believe that Tesla, which is the preeminent electric vehicle producer, has a market value that has is more than some of the incumbents that have been in existence for over a century. It has overrun their market value within a short space of time as an innovator. So we need to see more of such innovation that will build efficiency, reduce carbon emission, and make the world a safer place and a better place for everyone. These are 5 trends that see from where we are sitting.
Before you go, Kweku, let's talk a little bit about how we build a financial system that is able to deliver on some of these things that you are talking about. As Standard Chartered, where do you guys think this should go?
Good question, Godfrey. I think as much as we have made bold commitments, it doesn't start and end with us. First of all, regulators must come to the table and set rules that facilitate and encourage market participants to act in a responsible manner. What will be rewarded matters, and what will not be rewarded or what will be penalized matters in creating a sustainable market. Equally important is governments. Governments must also come to the table. At the end of the day, government exerts a lot of influence across all countries and can set the agenda for the market and for the civil society to follow. So I think government must come in not with a big stick, but as a willing partner to listen and to engage and to exchange ideas, as opposed to just coming with a one-dimensional view of things and insisting it's my way or the highway. I think there are new ways of collaborating and coming out with the best ideas to enable our societies to thrive. Ultimately, it's about inequality. I think the COVID crisis has exposed the massive inequality around the world. We are all in the same storm, but we are in different boats. And I think sustainable financing is a way of bringing about better equality and reducing the disparities, the income disparities, the insecurity around the world, because then it doesn't create a cohesive and conducive environment for investors, for investment. And we are investors, but we also want to see a conducive environment to invest in. And so it involves bringing all the stakeholders to the table, government, regulators, the investing community, and civil society. I believe that we can all come together to fashion out new rules of engagement, new rules, a new world order post-COVID crisis that restores credibility and faith in institutions, in government, and in society's ability to deliver value, as well as equitable societies for humanity. I think that's what the glaring omissions that the COVID crisis has exposed, that we live in a very unequal world. And so once the crisis hits, and as the experts say, this may not be the last crisis we'll see. There's also the climate change waiting around the corner. And the experts say the impact would be worse than COVID. They say that coastal communities will suffer disproportionately. So, Godfrey, what I'm saying is that we are running out of time, and there must be less talk and more action and commitment by people who have the power and the authority to do so now for the benefit of future generations. We as a bank, Standard Chartered, are prepared to do our bit by the commitments we've made in prior years, and even in years before it became fashionable to do sustainable financing. And it's a clarion call to everyone else, all stakeholders, not just financial institutions, but governments, regulators, to come to the table, fashion out new rules that make things work for everyone, particularly for those of us in Africa. I hope that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement would recognize some of these emerging trends we spoke about and factor that into the policies that would come out subsequently to facilitate trade and development across the continent.
Collaboration is the way to go, and without it, we are close to being doomed. Kweku, thanks very much for joining us, and thanks you for your thoughts. And we're certainly hoping that this crisis has given us an opportunity to rethink the way things have been done. Thank you for joining us.